Good evening, folks, and welcome to the live stream. I hope you're all very well this evening. Let's see who we have on tonight. We have Hugh. Great to see you on, Hugh, and welcome to Discord. We have Colin. Great to see you once again, Colin. Greetings from New York. Hope you're well over there. We have Bumbling Boris Buffoon. Great to see you, Bumbling Boris Buffoon. We have Raven 1983 Witch. Great to see you once again. Ava is here. Great to see you, Ava. We also have Tiny Demolition Lover. Hope you're well up there in Scotland. We have John O'Sullivan is on. Enzo the God, Young Ralph, great to see all of you. Mad Monk 33 is here. Van Necronizer is on as well. We have Artibus, great to see you, Artibus. Daily Blase, great to have you on. Enjoying your content. I saw your clips on Twitter today from the House of Commons. I'm going to use, well, one of them that you used as well, with Mark Francois a little bit later. That was funny. We have Roshin. Great to see you, Roshin. We also have Killer. Thanks for moderating, Killer. Great to see you. We have Alan Thompson. Great to see you, Alan. CGM is here. Great to have you on. Hope you're well. Thanks for moderating too. We also have... did I say hello to Mad Monk? If not, hello, Mad Monk. We also have Timmy Bing. Great to see you. Wes, great to have you on. Eddie is here. One Angry Pagan is on. We also have Chatty Rat. Great to see you, Chatty Rat. Who else have we got? Sean is on. Great to see you, Sean. Dancer, 91 Leads, and so many more. Hope you're all very well, and greetings to everyone who's just popped on. Remember to smash the like button. Helps the stream. You can also support the channel by becoming a patron or becoming a member on YouTube, and you can send me a super chat and I'll read it out during the stream. Of course, we're going to talk about Brexit. We're going to talk about the economy and a little bit about Ukraine as well. So there's big development taking place there. But first of all, Brexit. Going so well, isn't it? It's a bit like the Sunday roast. We always ask, how is Brexit going? Well, it's not going so well because Brexiteers are at each other's throats at the moment, especially the ones within the ERG. So it says here, Tories' revised plan to scrap EU laws are still reckless, says lawyers. So, the Tories had originally planned, well, it was more like Rishi Sunak had originally planned to bring the chopper down on 4,000 EU laws. I said in the Sunday roast, which you'll see on Sunday, of course, how, I think it was on Sunday roast. Anyway, it was Liz Truss had started off with 2,500 laws or something like that. And then to do one better, Rishi Sunak came out with 4,000 laws. So I'm going to get rid of 4,000 laws, not 2,500 or 2,300, whatever it was. And of course, there was no thinking behind any of this. It was just, what do the members of the party want to be as hard on Brexit as possible? So I'm going to get rid of 4,000 laws by the end of 2023. That was back in 2022. Anyway, it says Conservatives' decision to then, of course, as we're getting closer, we're almost halfway through 2023. Then they've decided, we can't actually get rid of all these 4,000 laws. Something I find really ironic when you hear Jacob Rees-Mogg and others blaming the civil service for this, saying, the civil service don't. Jacob Rees-Mogg was the guy who, when he was the business secretary, wanted to chop the civil service into pieces. He wanted to sack something like 70,000 employees from the civil service. So they want the civil service to carry out this work, which will be a massive undertaking, and at the same time do it with fewer people. Well, as we know, businesses have put pressure on the government, trade unions have put pressure, charities, organisations, and even the EU have said this is a mistake, and there's been a U-turn. Wasn't well received by Brexiteers, of course, because they don't understand reality, it seems. Anyway, the Conservatives' decision to water down proposed legislation to remove 4,000 EU laws from the statute books is still a reckless and irresponsible project, leading barristers have said. While the business secretary, Kemi Badenoch, was accused of a massive climb down, barristers say the retention of sweeping undemocratic ministerial powers and the removal of the interpretive effect of EU law will blow up decades of legal precedent set by courts in Britain and makes for legislation that found in authoritarian states. The government's plan the government's change of approach reducing the number of laws is catching the headlines, said Eleanor Doers, partner at Bateswell and one of the lawyers who worked on retaining EU law in the Brexit Parliament, in the Brexit department. It is welcome, but there is still a precipice for rights, liabilities and powers. It was a reckless piece of legislation from the start, and it's still a reckless piece of legislation, she added. Dulles, who specialises in data laws, previously worked with Dominic Raab to retain EU law when Brexit happened. We did that to provide certainty, she said. Now all of a sudden they are throwing that out the window, and fundamental rights are going to be deleted by this law. At stake is the concept of interpretive effect, something the government refers to as the supremacy of EU law. The government announced it will reduce the number of laws it is going to remove from the statute books, but also said it is scrapping the rule that sets out how laws are interpreted, effectively avoiding precedents set by the courts and tribunals up and down the country over the past 47 years. Once again, it doesn't make any sense to do this. What was the motivation here? To keep Brexiteers happy. And even the limited amount of change that's going to take place is still going to have a negative effect. But I want to show you the exchange in the House of Commons yesterday, I believe it was, between Mark Francois and Kemi Badenoch.
On the 18th of January this year, it passed third reading with a government majority of 59, and again, not a single Tory MP voted against it. So it had managed to unify the Conservative Parliamentary Party on an admittedly controversial issue. It left this House without a single Tory MP opposing it. Why then, when it's gone to the other place, the House of Lords, has the government performed a massive climb down on its own bill, despite having such strong support from its own backbenches? Secretary of State, what on earth are you playing at?
The only solution was to ignore it or to reduce it down to zero. As Richard has pointed out, the best number for the number of laws to remove would be zero.
Mr. Speaker, I've already explained the reasons why we have changed the approach, and I'm very, very happy to repeat them for my honourable friend. He should know that I'm not somebody who gets pushed around lightly. The fact is, I went in and looked at the detail, and I decided that this was the best way to deliver it. This was not, and I will stress again.
She's extremely arrogant, isn't she? She was pretty arrogant also with the Speaker of the House the other day, who called her out on that. So the MPs supported it from the Conservative Party. They thought, okay, let's move it to the other place, to the House of Lords. And she decided, no, it's my decision to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and realise, well, actually, this isn't working.
Again, this was not the Prime Minister's decision. As a Secretary of State, I have to be responsible and look at what we can make sure is deliverable. This is the best way to get him what he wants. It may have been different from what was put on the floor of the House, but if he wants what I want, which is ending EU interpretive effects by the end of this year, ending the supremacy of EU law by the end of this year, I can tell him he is not in the room. He's very welcome to send me the list of things that he wants repealed, but this is the way to get it done.
And there you have it. And the Brexiteers are not too happy about that, of course, because it shows that that when they come up against reality pushes back. It made no sense to get rid of these laws. It would create massive instability. And where is the benefit? What is the benefit of doing this? There are some benefits for ministers. The idea that you would allow ministers just to get rid of laws, without any oversight. And there was, of course, no scrutiny of these laws. And there was no real representation of what was going to come after. So we're going to get rid of laws, but we're not going to tell you how we're going to replace them or what we're going to replace them with. Now, I looked at some of the laws that were being replaced, and it wasn't very clear because it was pointing to laws that already existed the British statute books from years before. So it's not like they're creating new laws to replace the ones that they were removing. It seems they're just getting rid of the EU one, and like it's a sort of smoke and mirrors game. But I'll look into it in more detail in the future. But at the moment it seems to be a case of we want to get rid of something. We have to keep the Brexiteers happy. We can't get rid of everything. But there is a fear that they will get rid of things like environmental protections or, for example, worker protections as well. Gareth, thanks so much for that super chat. Can we just repeal the Acts of Union, please? I beg. Yes. Maybe that would be that'd be a place for them to start. Repeal the Act of Union, and then allow Scotland to go. A bit more on this.
Betrayed at all. I think the decision that's been taken by the government is actually really sensible. I think the bill itself was ill-conceived, ridiculous, inherently ridiculous, and crafted in the middle of a crazy Tory election period when the various candidates were trying to outbid each other to be more Eurosceptic than their competitors. Not a sensible way to make national policy.
But for all the extravagant promises, we haven't really taken back control, have we?
Well, we have actually. I mean, in the sense that Parliament can. I would rather it would take its time. I mean, David Davis, who's a Brexiteer, made this point about the retained EU law bill, that if it takes 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, the point is that those laws need to be scrutinised.
It's a net loss at the moment, isn't it, the impact of Brexit? There aren't really many positive impacts.
I don't really see it like that. I mean, it depends what you mean. I mean, do you mean purely on the economy? I've written for the Times that there are clearly difficulties that need to be addressed. But on something like defence, I mean, if you look at the deal that was signed between Italy and the UK, the Memorandum of Understanding.
But you could sign a Memorandum of Understanding while being a member of the European Union. Like, this is not a trade deal. This is just a Memorandum of Understanding. It actually reduces some of the friction on trade between Great Britain and Italy. But before Brexit, before leaving the European Union, there was no friction. So it's like saying, look, what we've done is we created this problem. Now we reduce the negatives of this problem a little bit. And here, this is a benefit of having the problem in the first place. Ridiculous.
And which also then the fighter program, which also involves the Japanese. That's a deal which the Italians are clear would not necessarily have been feasible before.
It's very...
What? How would it not be feasible before? You were within the same single market. You would have been able to sell goods to Italy without these problems. Is this guy for real?
Caveated, though, isn't it? I mean, it's not something that would look any good on the side of a bus, is it?
Well, I mean, both sides, and I've been clear about this throughout. I mean, both sides in the referendum lied their socks off.
Both sides did not lie. On the Remain side, what they did was they took data from experts. They looked at the Bank of England at the time. The Bank of England said that these are predictions about what will happen if we leave the European Union. This is what will happen if we leave the single market. Now, did all of those predictions come out to be true? No. But there's a difference between making a bad prediction and lying. Lying is where you say this will happen or this will not happen. And then it turned out to be the opposite. Like, for example, people made clear, were telling clear lies. Sorry, I'm looking at the chat. People were telling barefaced lies. Things like Nigel Farage saying, we can be like Switzerland. We can be like Norway. And then 6 months later saying, nobody wants to be like Switzerland. Nobody wants to be like Norway. Nobody's talking about leaving the single market, Daniel Hannan. These were clear lies. When it came to Boris Johnson, how many lies did Boris Johnson? Boris Johnson just, even when it comes to Northern Ireland, saying there'll be no border in the Irish Sea. When he was asked, okay, where will the border go? He would say, it's not going in the Irish Sea. Like, these were promises, these were Brexit-style promises that were made. These were lies. the idea that the German car industry would put pressure. This was not a prediction. This was a lie, that the German car industry would put pressure on Angela Merkel to put pressure on the EU to give Britain a great trade deal. That Britain could be outside the single market, but have all the benefits of being of the single market, but being outside it. Being outside the EU, but being like a member. Why? Because we're important. They were lies. Because the experts were saying the opposite. Anyway. Moving on. Starmer claims government has lost control of overall migration numbers. Okay, this is a little bit concerning because we had hoped that the Labour Party would not run to the centre, run to the right, I should say, on the issue of immigration. And I have this fear that the Labour Party are focusing on the red wall or on these marginal seats too much, trying to win back racists and bigots who probably voted for Boris Johnson and the Tories back in 2019. Britain doesn't have enough immigration. That's the problem. That's why businesses aren't able to find the workers they need. The country needs more immigration. And when it comes to immigration, things like student numbers are included in this. So students are bringing money into the country. You want more students coming in. You don't want fewer students. You want more. You want more workers to pick fruit, to work in the NHS, to be carers, to work in hospitality. Anyway, yesterday the Financial Times reported that migration figures due out later this month are expected to show a net migration at record levels. It said net migration was at 504,000 between 2021 and 2022, both in June. But when the figure for 2022, but that figure, I think we need to wait and see what those figures are. But I've seen the speculation. I think if we're anywhere near that figure, then it will show that the government has completely lost control. We need a managed approach, and we haven't got it. We haven't got that. There isn't a managed approach. But if businesses can't get access to the workers they need, then immigration is not a problem. Like almost everywhere else under this government, there's no plan, there's no control, and just like everything else, it seems that the system is broken. Starmer's comments represent a departure because in the past Labour has mostly focused on criticism of the government in relation to migration on illegal immigration, where even the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, admits the government has lost control. On legal migration, immigration, in the past Labour had tended to take to be at least as liberal as the government, or more so. Starmer famously defended free movement when he was running as Labour leader. But when the scale of legal immigration now becomes a political headache for the Tories, he may have sensed an opportunity. Labour has also said that British companies should not be reliant on foreign labour, and that training UK workers should be a bigger priority. Oh God. See, once again, how long does it take to train up workers? For example, a doctor. If you want to train up GPs, it takes 7 to 8 years. If you want a specialist, we're talking about 10 years. So it's cheaper, and it costs about £150,000 to train up a GP, a doctor. If you bring people in from abroad, you don't have to pay anything. They're free. They're already trained up. And you have them on demand, basically. Not really on demand, but pretty much on demand. So you say, we want GPs, you bring them in. Now, it's more difficult because of the Tory policy on immigration. But you could bring people, you need 500 GPs, bring them in tomorrow. If you want to train up 500 GPs, that's really bloody expensive, and it takes a huge amount of time. So numbers of GPs are going up, but not to the extent that is covering the demand. The population has increased dramatically, so you need more GPs. And you can't just train them up. And this is just GPs. If you're looking at any other industry, it takes time to train people up. That's why it makes more sense to have a more open immigration policy. especially as the country doesn't have enough people, doesn't have enough workers. Alistair, thanks so much for that super chat. Labour don't give a fig about Scotland, Max. They just want to be in power no matter who they snuggle up to, and it's not the SNP. There was a clip today, I think it was today or yesterday, where a member of the Labour Party was in, I think it was political live show on the BBC, where they ruled out completely going into coalition with the SNP. And I think it was Dr. Philip, I forget what her name is, the SNP MP. She replied by saying, so if you don't have the numbers to form a coalition government, I don't think this will happen. But it's still a year and a half away yet, so anything could happen. But if you don't have the numbers to make up a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, you won't reach out to the SNP. You'd prefer to let the Tories form their own coalition. I don't think that would work. I don't think that would go down well with the public. So I think the public would be happy to see Labour form a coalition with the SNP. But Labour don't want to do that because it would open them up to attacks of, they're going to throw the union under a bus. They're not unionists. They don't care about the union. They're getting into bed with separatists, as the Tories would call the SNP. Interesting that Novara Media are more interested in attacking Starmer than the Conservatives, although have to admit they crushed Question Time. Yes, I think it's Ash Sarkar is really, really good journalist and really good on shows like Question Time. I think their position is they would like to see Jeremy Corbyn back in power, back in charge of the Labour Party, I should say, and eventually Prime Minister, or someone like Jeremy Corbyn. They're not fans of Starmer, and I understand, they have big disagreements with Starmer. I would imagine they would like to see Labour in power because they don't want the Tories in power, but their focus tends to be more internal criticism, so criticism of the Labour Party. SNP will never form a coalition with Westminster government. Never, never, never. No chance that Scottish Labour MPs would go into coalition with SNP. Scottish Labour would prefer to go into coalition with the Tories, which the councillors have already, yes. So it's I think it's practically impossible for Labour to go into coalition with the SNP. So it's either an outright Labour majority or a Labour Lib Dem majority. Or it could be a Labour Lib Dem minority government, but then that wouldn't last very long. In regards to immigration, once again, in the 2019 manifesto, the Conservatives promised on immigration that there would be fewer low-skilled migrants and overall numbers would come down. This is not a promise that has been kept, and the Daily Telegraph today claims, on the basis of the analysis by the Centre for Political Studies think tank, that figures out later this month would show that net migration between 700 and 997,000 for the year ending December 2022. At the Downing Street lobby briefing, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said Rishi Sunak remained committed to cutting the level of net migration. He said, I'm not going to get ahead and start speculating which figures may or may not show when they're published later this month. The Prime Minister's overall commitment is to reducing migration overall, and that is what we are trying to do through tackling illegal migration and the points-based system, which allows us flexibility based on our needs. A spokesperson said he did not believe Sunak had ever put a figure on how much he would see migration fall by. Yes, we're going to cut it by how much, unspecified number. The same with the stop the boats to zero. Of course, it was once again red meat to the base, but not to people who actually have any critical thinking skills. Because you're not supposed to ask, how are you going to stop the boats, or stop the boats to what extent? Same with migration. You can't you can't have it down to zero. It's impossible. But also, this is just a policy for racists and bigots to try and keep them on board, and it was in order to defeat the Labour Party in 2019. Running to the right, Brexit and immigration, and of course Brexit and immigration are deeply intertwined. It got many people to come out and vote for Brexit because they were concerned, quote unquote, with migration. And a lot of the people who were concerned about migration are now turning around and saying, actually, we need more workers. Because, when I go into my pub on a Monday afternoon, they say we don't serve lunch anymore because we don't have the staff. What is the migration situation in Italy? Once again, it's not. The numbers are much larger. I don't have the figures in front of me, but the numbers are much larger in Italy than in Britain, especially during the summer period. And the rhetoric is the same. We need to stop illegal migration. We need to stop illegal migration. But Italy is deeply dependent on migrant workers to pick fruit and vegetables, especially in the south of Italy. And unfortunately, they work in terrible conditions. But what you have is the politicians saying we need to stop it, but they don't really want to stop it because the big industries, including some big brands, benefit from a lot of illegal work taking place, where people don't have contracts, where people are living in shanty towns, basically on the side of on these farms, where they have no worker protections and they can be fired at any moment. There have been a number of scandals over that, but nothing really changes. The politicians would say we need to stop illegal immigration, we need to stop these boats, but in reality, they understand that they don't want to go too far because it will impact the economy. It will literally impact the economy. Anyway, on the issue of the economy, UK bottom of G7 growth league table despite avoiding winter recession. Despite expanding slightly over the last 2 quarters, avoiding a winter recession, the UK is still bottom of the G7. Remember the world-beating, remember Boris Johnson's world-beating, what was it, world-beating everything. Bottom of the G7 league table for growth since the COVID-19 pandemic, economists say. Today's GDP report shows the UK economy was still 0.5% smaller in the first quarter of this year than in the last quarter of 2019, just before COVID-19 hit the global economy. In contrast, France's economy is 1.3% larger and Germany's is just 0.1% smaller than in the first quarter of 2019. The US economy has raced ahead and is 5.3% bigger than its pre-COVID size. The US economy benefited from several large stimulus packages and also didn't suffer as much of a jump in energy prices as Europe. This is the real kicker here, is that what the US is doing is pumping huge amounts of money into the economy. Stimulus plans, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, where they're investing huge amounts of money in renewable energy, in net zero. This is creating jobs and it's attracting companies and investment. For example, there was a video I uploaded today, actually. I think it dropped a few hours ago. There's a British company who works making, I think it's a type of membrane for hydrogen fuel cells. They're considering moving their operations to the US because that's where the money is. That's where the investment is. And they were asked, well, what about the UK? And they said, there's no plan. There's no plan to invest here. There's no money and there's no plan. And where the arms race to a certain extent is taking place on net zero is between the US, Europe and China. And if the UK was part of the European Union still, then it would be benefiting from the amount of money being pumped into into dealing with net zero and new technologies as well. And then you can see the table here. What about inflation?
But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
But you don't control inflation. Like last year you said we don't control inflation. Now you're saying we will get inflation down.
The UK remains the only G7 country in which the quarterly measure of GDP has not recovered to its pre-COVID level. In March, the economy went backwards. When will we get back to where we were 3 years ago?
If you look at the most up-to-date monthly figures, we are now above pandemic levels across the whole economy, but only marginally. And we want to see much faster growth. That's why we need to stick to our plan, above all to bring inflation down, because that's a drag on growth. But also part of that plan is to relieve the pressure on families as we go through this difficult period. That's why we've increased this month the national living wage to its highest ever level.
Is it enough? This has to be the question. You increase the national living wage. Is it enough? No, it's not. then why are you trumping it as some sort of solution to the problem? This is where the journalists, I think, there's a huge problem with journalism. It breaks down when they don't ask this simple question of politicians. Is it enough? When Rishi Sunak talks about we're spending 100 billion here, 200 million there, the next question should be, is it enough? Now, the politician would have to respond. They won't. They'll try and dodge it. They'll start talking about, but it's a huge amount of money and blah, blah. What they need to do is they have to be forced to answer this question, because if they answer, yes, it is enough, then the next question is, then why are people suffering? Why are people struggling? If the answer is, no, it's not enough, then why is it not enough? And why are you presenting it as a win?
We're doing big payments to help people with their electricity bills, but the long-term solution is not subsidy, it's actually getting inflation down and growth up.
And on the quarterly...
But you were saying that last year, and you didn't get inflation down. Now you're saying we're going to get inflation down. Gareth, thanks so much for that super chat. Inflation Reduction Act. Careful, Max, Kate and Kunku. Already think of the old Joe as a profile. The DUP. Sarah Alpa and Fife. What's that? 48. I don't know what that is. Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, so the just keep repeating Inflation Reduction Act at people like Kate Hoey and the DUP. They will literally explode.
basis, when will we get back to where we were?
I think it's for the economists to say when we are going to get our quarterly levels back to pre-pandemic.
There isn't a plan. It's all relying on somebody else doing something. What is it with the Tories? They never take responsibility for something going wrong. When something goes right, they take responsibility for that. They claim responsibility for it. But when it comes to fixing things, it's always somebody else needs to do it. Where is his plan to reduce inflation? Because if you ask him, how are you going to reduce inflation, he'll start talking about the Bank of England. But how are you going to reduce inflation?
Levels, but Germany is also in the same situation as we are. The bigger picture here is that growth is picking up much faster than anyone thought possible. That's encouraging. The International Monetary Fund, who are here in Japan with me, say that the British economy is on the right track. But there's much to do. We've still got to get inflation down, and we've got to stick to our plan to make sure we remove those pressures on people's weekly shopping bills.
Strike action is holding back growth. It's also leading to cancelled operations and school closures. When will you resolve these disputes?
We want to resolve the public sector strikes as quickly as we can. We're prepared to be completely reasonable. We will talk about anything except measures that will entrench high inflation, because the root cause of the anger of the people who are striking at the moment is that the cost of their weekly shop has gone up by more than their salary, and we don't want to be here in a year's time having the same discussion. So it is challenging for everyone as we see when interest rates go up, but it's the right thing to do, because if we bring down inflation, we can restore the value of people's pay packets.
And how are you going to achieve that? But there is no, the growth we're talking about, oh no, it's not here, it's the other one. But the growth let me see if I can bring it back. There is no growth. It's zero. It's the economy is still 5.5% smaller than 2019. So there is no growth. It's zero. Zero is 0.5% less. So it's negative growth, if you want to call it. It's not a proper recession, because it avoided the recession the last month, or in December, I think it was. But it's the worst performing in the G7. This is not something to boast about. But they don't have a plan. There is no plan. It's about relying on somebody else doing the work. It's always about somebody else taking responsibility and doing the job. Gareth, once again, it's for the experts to say. Effing experts. Lefty lawyers, Germany, France, Ramona, civil service, Miklach, gay beer. Love to the family. And on that note, I hope you enjoyed this comedy moment. Wow, you read my mind, Gareth. Richard Turner, thanks so much for that super chat. What a liar he is. Germany is not the same. Far from it. I'm in Germany this month using up some of my 90 days. Food is not as expensive as the UK. Just lies. That's all he has left. That's all they have left, is they go, oh, well, Germany isn't doing so well. But Germany was more exposed to energy prices than the UK was. So, yes, both Germany and the UK came out of the pandemic. Germany is doing better at the moment in respect to the UK, but Germany was more impacted by the war in Ukraine than the UK was when it came to energy prices. So, as that situation resides, Germany's going to be in a much better position, because it's not, the price of energy is going down, so Germany should bounce back faster than the UK, or be in a better position, I should say. Like, we have the yellow one is Germany, so Germany's slightly ahead of the UK, but it was in a worse position in regards to energy. Anyway, guys, thanks so much, Richard and Gareth. Well, let's take a short break and be back in just a jiffy. Hope you enjoy this.
Colin is in Portsmouth. Hello, Colin. Oh my goodness. I've never heard you so cross, Colin. What's happening?
Woke King Prince Ruddy Giles. Why does he have to keep saying stuff? He and the Archbishop of Canterbury going on about the migration bill and climate change. It's disgusting. What are they, politicians?
I thought we loved our king, though, Colin. Didn't we just have a big celebration for him?
Oh, God save the king, cross my heart, don't get me wrong. But not on the things I don't agree with. We gave him all that, and now he thinks he can do what he likes. Honestly, you put a funny out on someone, and it goes to their head.
Well, he's our monarch, Colin. He speaks for the nation, you see.
Not if it's against the will of the people.
Right.
It's Queen Princess Camilla Concord I feel for. He's leading her astray.
Yeah.
She'll be demanding a windfall tax on energy companies, and before you know it, we'll all be speaking Belgian.
What's the difference between the will of the people and the will of the nation? They seem quite similar.
Oh, they're very different.
Right.
For a start, you only need about 35% of the people to have their will. And I'm surprised by the Archbishop of Canterbury. I know we proclaimed you the mouthpiece of God, mate, but you don't have to relay everything God's saying, especially the bit about showing compassion for the less fortunate. Give us the bits we want to hear.
What are you going to do then, Colin? You can't vote out the monarchy, I'm afraid.
And that's a shame, it really is. I'd protest if it weren't illegal.
Whoa, Colin! You just expressed the wish to protest. That's illegal. You can get arrested for that.
Oh, well, it's a fair cop, Anthony. Yeah, come and arrest me, Scotland Yard. Fair dues. This is the last time you'll hear from me, Anthony. I'll tell you what, it's been a pleasure to talk over the years, and love to the family.
Love to the family, Colin. Love to the family.
If they do send someone to arrest me, can they send Penny Mordaunt? I think that might soften the blow.
Yeah, show them your video.
It's worn out.
Okay, I don't know what that video is. Staying with the economy for a moment. Bank of England's Pill says there may be more work to do on inflation. Speaking of interest rates, Bank of England Chief Executive Hugh Pill has said today that the UK Central Bank might have to do more to contain risk from the surge in inflation. So, okay, let me understand this correctly. Inflation was rising last year, so the Bank of England said we need to increase interest rates to bring down inflation. Inflation didn't go down. So what did the Bank of England doing now? We're going to raise interest rates again. Okay, we continually increased interest rates. It didn't bring down inflation, but we're going to continue to use the same method as before. Pill told a Bank of England webinar that there was evidence of a more favourable pattern in terms of the inflation outlook. However, this progress could be interrupted in ways different to past trends, which means that there may be more work to do. Pill was speaking a day after the Bank of England raised interest rates for the 12th meeting in a row to a near 15-year high of 4.5%. After the rate rise was announced, the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey rebuked Pill for his choice of words after the chief economist said in April that people need to accept that they are poorer following the jump in energy costs. Yes, this was the guy who said, you just need to, this is what he said back in April. Britons need to accept they're poorer, says Bank of England economist. Like, talk about disconnect from reality. Don't ask for more money. Just get used to being poor, says the guy who's probably on £500,000 a year. When you're on about £500,000 a year, maybe it's less, but it's probably in, somewhere in that area. That's probably on his wages. He no doubt has investments and stuff like that. But let's say £500,000 a year. He's telling people, just tighten your belts. Cut back on your Starbucks and your your avocado toast, and cancel that Netflix subscription. That's what you need to do to save money. I've downgraded, from an Aston Martin to a BMW or something like this. Number 3, thanks so much for that super chat. James O'Brien had a call from a woman who pointed out that the people may be afraid to protest now. They may lose their jobs, etc. This is huge, chilling. Oh my God! Yeah, this is very interesting point that you raised here, and that was raised by the caller. This reminds me of what's happening, for example, in the US when it comes to, another layer of a problem that the right wing think tanks want to inflict upon Britain of private health insurance. So many people are doing their job not because they like the job or because it pays well or if it pays enough, but because of the health care benefits. So if you don't have health insurance in the US, you're in very serious trouble. And many people are doing jobs that they don't like just to have the health insurance that goes along with it. If they lose their job, they lose the health insurance, and then they're back to square one. So if they have an accident or something, they have to pay the costs out of their pocket. The idea that you could risk losing your job if you go to a protest, of course, is going to have a chilling effect on so many people. This is why I think it's so important that the next government roll back these things. Now, I had a bit of a back and forth when I released a video last week, and I released an apology, and then I was told I was wrong to apologize. So I'm going to let that one go for now. I'm not going to return to that. But I really hope, I'm not going to get into whether Keir Starmer is going to roll back or not roll back, but I hope that he's going to roll back these restrictions on the right to protest. This can't be let to bed in. It has to be repealed. Otherwise, people will not be able to protest. You're probably wondering, well, why would people protest a Labour government? You should have the right to protest anyway. Thanks for that, number 3. But it is, yes, people are concerned about, should I protest? What happens if my boss finds out? Or there could be pressure put on the company not to allow their employees, not to encourage their employees to protest. Wolf Pet, great to see you. Thanks so much for that super chat. World beating interest rates. That's it. world-beating inflation, world-beating interest rate. Well, not world-beating inflation. I think it's I don't remember which country it is has the highest inflation in the world, something like 500%. So no, world beating, European beating at least anyway. Anyway, moving on to the somewhat related one.
Well, this is nothing to celebrate, and it's yet more low growth on the back of 13 years of low growth. And I think the essential question many people today will be asking themselves is, do I feel any better off now than I did 13 years ago when this government started? And I think the resounding answer to that around the country will be no.
Tory conference 1st of October to 4th of October, Manchester. Maybe I should... maybe Sir Ron could visit.
Don't.
Reports today that migration numbers could hit 1 million. How do you respond to that?
I think we need to wait and see what those figures are, but I've seen that speculation. I think if they're anywhere near that figure, then it will show the government's completely lost control. We need a managed approach here. We haven't got that. We need to wait and see what those figures are, but it's like almost everything else under this government. There's no plan, there's no control, and...
Starmer's approach to everything is we need to wait and see. We need to see how things pan out. We need to allow things to stew, to sizzle, to cook a little bit longer, and then have a look and see what it is. I don't know who it was that compared it to trying to carry, a delicate object or delicate china, I think it was, across an ice rink. He believes he's going to have this victory, but he doesn't want to say anything that might upset the apple cart, or it might, cause some sort of shake and knock him over. But it appears as it's very frustrating to watch, because you want somebody who's going to be a voice for ordinary people, who's going to stand up against the Tory dictatorship. It's basically a dictatorship what's happening at the moment. You want somebody who's going to stand up to that, who's going to call it out, and who's going to be radically different. Gareth, thanks so much for that super chat. The Met accidentally arrested as a royal superfan. Reason being, she was in the general vicinity of people who were suspected of potentially peacefully protesting. They had her locked up for 13 hours. I wonder if she's still a supporter of the Met Police. Maybe she wasn't one before, but yeah, that was an interesting case where, why are you here? I'm here to support the royal family. Well, okay, we're going to throw you in jail because you're near people who don't agree with the royal family. What? 13 hours. That was probably not a very nice experience. A royal superfan. Why would anyone be a royal superfan? My question is for, why would somebody be a fan of somebody who doesn't give a crap about you? So when I saw the people sitting in the rain, I was thinking Charles would never come out and say, I'm going to sit in the rain in solidarity. Anyway. Starmer is a dictator. Anyway, moving on. The NHS.
The government and NHS leaders have made it a top priority to cut elective care waiting times. But today's numbers paint a mixed picture. Despite prioritising the service, overall waiting lists have reached a new record of 7.33 million. That's up 110,000, the biggest month-on-month increase since August last year. A key NHS target was to eliminate 18-month waits by April. That has been missed, but they are getting close. In September 2021, there were almost 125,000 patients waiting a year and a half. That is now down to almost 10,000. Half of those remaining are at just 10 NHS trusts, the NHS says.
Now, how many of these people have given up? People have been waiting for surgery, and they've just said, okay, I'll give up. I'll just renounce waiting, or they'll go privately. And I think this is where Rishi Sunak may actually be able to achieve his goal of cutting NHS waiting times. Not waiting times, waiting list. Because there's a difference between the waiting time and the waiting list. Because the waiting list is the number of people, while the waiting time is how long people will have to wait. So they won't be able to cut the waiting time very much, but they may actually be able to cut the waiting list by just forcing more people to go privately. So people who had been waiting to go on the NHS, they're told you have to wait a year and a half. I don't have the time. I need the surgery now or whatever. They put some money aside and then they go privately, and then they're taken off the waiting list, and then it's seen as a victory for the Tories. See, we brought down the waiting list because we've convinced people who can afford to go privately.
Part of the reason for missing targets is the unprecedented industrial action seen over the past 6 months.
We've had to reschedule around 500,000 appointments over the period of all the industrial action that has taken place. But the important thing about today's figures is that thanks to the hard work of NHS staff, we have reduced the number of people who've been waiting more than 18 months for...
Okay, but people were waiting before the strike action, and they're waiting after the strike action. So yes, the strike action has created problems, but nothing in comparison to the actual existing waiting list.
Treatment by 90%.
There is also some good news for cancer services. The number of people waiting more than 2 months to start treatment is down to almost a third, compared with more than 41% in February. But before 2019, that figure had not exceeded 17%. There is also an alarming rise in children's waiting lists. While 18-month waits are continuing to be reduced, the number waiting for a year are at the highest since records began in April 2021.
So obviously children can't go private unless their parents pay for that. So it's more likely that children will have to wait. And once again, I believe that when the numbers are declining, it's not because the NHS is getting more money or getting more staff. How is it possible that the numbers are declining in the sense that the NHS is doing more work if they have fewer staff? They're constantly having fewer staff. So the only possible logical conclusion here is that people are giving up. People are getting themselves off the waiting list and going privately, or giving up on getting the surgery or the operation done at all.
The figures have amplified calls for the urgent release of a long-awaited workforce plan, with trust leaders warning that without it, the NHS will continue to struggle to meet ever-growing demand with too few staff.
I've had a number of CAT scans and such like over the last year, and I've never waited for more than a couple of weeks. Mind you, I'm in Ireland. I know Ireland also has some. The HSC has a number of problems with staff as well, but it doesn't seem to be as bad. Or dying, yes, with PET, and people are being taken off the waiting list because they're no longer with us. That's also another issue. But it demonstrates that the Tories just don't care. But if you can afford, go to the private clinic. If you can't afford, well, then just grim and bear it.
Let's kick off with those GDP figures, the growth figures that we saw released at 7 o'clock this morning. We weren't expecting them to be very good. We were expecting them to show that growth in the economy was flatlining, but they were much worse than that. A contraction.
Actually, I want to move on to...
It would be at 5%. We are still committed, and we believe that that halving of inflation will be delivered by the end of the year. That's a commitment we have. That's why it's particularly important that we have pay restraint. Food inflation is particularly high, but the supermarkets and retailers met with government representatives, and they're confident that those prices will start to come down. There's a bit of a 6 to 9 month lag in the...
So the Tories met with the supermarket chains and said, please, can you bring down your prices? And they went, yeah, sure. We're making massive profits. Why would we bring... Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll bring them down. Sure, okay. Like, how would you convince them? Like, what was on the other side? Like, you meet with the supermarket chains and you say, the price of eggs is too high. What can you do about it? Why should we do anything about it? Maybe those on the waiting list saw up the Farage GB News Right Said Fred themed impromptu striptease and nearly died. And promptly died from the abject disgust. Yes, I actually saw that. Unfortunately, on Twitter, I have autoplay on videos, and I was exposed to that monstrosity, that disgusting behavior, that crime against humanity. I'm not talking about mankinis. I'm talking about Nigel Farage doing a strip on GB News. It's news, remember, guys, it's news. To Right Wing Said Fred. Thanks so much, Gareth. And thank you so much for reminding me of that. Now I have to go and wash my eyes with bleach or wash my brain with bleach.
The process. So that should all lead towards... and government measures such as the energy guarantee lead to about a sort of 2 percentage point drop in inflation, and of course freezing fuel duty also assists as well. So there are certain government measures that will help towards controlling inflation, and there are also the sort of international impacts which we hope will lessen as well.
What about resolving strikes and the impact that would have on the economy? The ONS, in this release of the latest growth figures, has said that strikes have been a factor in this contraction in growth in March. There's another strike going on today. The ASLEF train drivers union is walking out today. You're obviously Transport Minister. How far away is that dispute from resolution?
Well, look, we hope it will be resolved. We have facilitated an offer which has been put to the leaders of the 2 trade unions, and we're asking for them to put that offer to their members. It's a very similar offer to one that was put by the RMT to the members that worked on Network Rail, which was the result of a lot of the industrial action of last year, and their members overwhelmingly accepted that offer. So our feeling is,
yes, but they're different trade unions and they're representing different workers. So you'll say, well, we offered this deal to this group of workers, and they accepted it. Then surely the RMT should do the same. But they're representing different workers. Mind Bleach Max 25 gallon drum. Yes. Can I put in an order for 2? Thanks, Alistair. Gareth, once again, inject the bleach, Max. Inject the best. Inject his best. Of course, no advice. We're not Donald Trump here, so we're talking about Nigel Farage. Thanks so much, Gareth. I'm not sure if I should be saying thank you.
It was good enough to be put to the members who work for Network Rail. Why not being good enough to put to the members who work on the trains? And we hope if that were the case, it would be accepted and we'd move on.
Well, ASLEF has called the 4% pay offer risible and obviously unacceptable.
Well, it's a 4% offer for this year, 4% offer for last year. And if you consider the average wage of a train driver is just short of £60,000 for a 35-hour base week, this would take the pay up to £65,000. And these are train drivers that have received a 39% increase in their wages since 2011. It's a well-paid job. It will continue to be even more well-paid.
How much was he paid? How much did your pay rise? How much did your pay increase in 2022 and 2023? And I know ASLEF represent train drivers, but I don't know if they represent other workers as well, because not everyone is on 65,000.
If they were to put that offer to their members.
What do you make of the fact that the 2 rail strikes, today by ASLEF, tomorrow by the RMT, coincide with people trying to get to the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool? The 2 unions say that it wasn't deliberately targeted, but what's your reaction to the timing of it?
Well, I mean, the unions have picked not just Eurovision, but the FA Cup final, with both Manchester teams coming down to London for that showcase, and the derby So they either don't have a particularly good sporting or events calendar, or it has been done deliberately to try and ratchet up the disruption for passengers. It's particularly challenging with regard to Eurovision because we're hosting that competition on behalf of Ukraine. There are contingencies in place. Our coach operators have really stood up to this and will deliver. But it's a huge shame to target our sort of cultural and...
So when should they target? When should they go on strike? Should they go on a strike, like, for example, next week? Or sometime in the future? Well, if they go on strike on a Monday morning, in the middle of August, well, that's going to affect somebody who who needs to go to hospital. So is that person less important than Eurovision? Like he's saying, we don't go on strike when Eurovision is on. Go on strike another time. Or, well, he doesn't want people to go on strike at all. So, whenever they go on strike, they're going to impact somebody. I think people not being able to take the train to Eurovision is less of a problem than people who may need to go to hospital, no?
Sort of sporting events, particularly for those events we're hosting for our friends over in Ukraine.
Sticking with the railways, the government announced yesterday that Transpennine services would go into government hands temporarily. What evidence is there that services will improve in government hands?
Well, this is a reset moment. It's an opportunity for us to change the operator and have a new start. We hope that means better relations with workforce and, of course, passengers. But ultimately, most of the matters were related to agreements that the unions were unwilling to work towards, I'm sorry to say. So there are a number of drivers who are retiring. There's a certain age, average about 53 for a train driver. Many are retiring. To try and put new drivers in place takes about 18 months to train. And normally you need to rely on overtime to be able to have people to be able to train up the drivers. And since December 2021, the unions had refused to allow the workforce to work overtime. So that's caused a huge issue. So my message is this is a reset.
Because there aren't enough workers. You need to recruit more staff. They're saying, look, we can't be doing all this work. We've refused to do overtime. Because think about it for a moment. If overtime is required, it means there isn't enough staff. It's logical. We don't have enough staff, so we want you to work overtime. And they're saying we don't want to work overtime because if we work overtime, you get more money, but then they end up burnt out. They don't want to do the extra hours. So there's pressure put on them to do more hours. Why? Because there isn't enough staff. So the solution is to hire more staff, but hiring more staff is more expensive. Now, I haven't been following this story, but it seems one of the networks has been nationalised. That's very interesting. And the general public seem happy with that because under private ownership, it was extremely unreliable. So if it turns out to be quite reliable and good, then hopefully it will be a harbinger for more nationalisation, more of the railway. Of course, the railway should be nationalised. It's another resource that should be in public ownership, not private ownership. Because as we've seen, the private companies will make cutbacks where they can and hand the profits over to shareholders and not reinvest it in the service or bringing down prices. Gareth, once again, thanks so much for that Super Chat, Max. You can't get a train from Manchester to London when the lines are functioning. Strike action isn't destroying the industry. It's broken. Yes. And I think it was Mick Lynch made that very point when he was interviewed recently. He said, people are upset with the railway, not because of the strike action, but because of the problems when there isn't strike action. Delays, the cost, unreliable service. It's, I remember some years ago where the trains were given these arbitrary targets, and in some cases they wouldn't stop at stations because they had to meet the target. So they had to go from A to B, they had to go to A to Z, but all the stations in between. In some cases, they wouldn't stop at stations because it would add more time and they would miss their target. Nationalise the bloody thing. What? Tories communist? Yeah, don't tell Jacob Rees-Mogg. Transpennine Express was renationalised yesterday. So, fingers crossed, it's going to be a good service for the public. if you remove the profit motivation, it's more likely to be a better service. We're conditioned to think that private companies are more efficient than public ones, but what you have instead is the private companies cut back on services, cut back on safety, cut back on costs, and transfer whatever savings they have generally to their shareholders and not invested in the company. Anyway, guys, we're almost at the end of the stream, so I just want to cover one final story here, which could be a big game changer in Ukraine. If this loads. Hey. Ah, damn it. That seems to be a problem with Twitter. Oh no, here we go.
I can confirm that the UK is donating Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine. Storm Shadow is a long-range, conventional-only precision strike capability. It complements the long-range systems already gifted, including HIMARS and Harpoon missiles, as well as Ukraine's own Neptune cruise missile and longer-range missions elsewhere gifted. The donation of these weapon systems gives Ukraine the best chance to defend themselves against Russia's continued brutality, especially the deliberate targeting of Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, which is against international law. Ukraine has a right to be able to defend itself against this. The use of Storm Shadow will allow Ukraine to push back Russian forces based within Ukrainian sovereign territory. Today
Okay, so what the UK government is doing is it's providing these Storm Shadow missile, long-range missiles to the Ukrainian military. You can see here they have, let me see, yes, operational range is over 3,000 nautical miles, 500 kilometers, 350 miles for the standard, well, for the non-export version, and then the export version is slightly less, well, a good bit less actually, about half. 250 kilometers, 155 miles. So this is probably the one that Ukraine will receive. This will mean that Ukraine will actually be able to hit targets in Crimea. And I think this is going to be the real game changer, because if the Russians are kicked out of Crimea, this is not Donbass, this is Crimea, and this is what was annexed back in 2014 by the Russian military, and this is what Putin described as the first step, in a sense, to the overall takeover of Ukraine. Now, if the Russians get kicked out of Crimea, it'll be extremely difficult for Putin to excuse that. When we saw the 4-day special operation last year, lasting a year, they said that they would take over Kiev in a day or two. In a few days, that was the plan. The idea that they would be removed from Crimea is, I believe, would be a game changer, and it could bring down Putin's regime, because he would not be able to explain that away. It would be massive embarrassment for the Russian military, and we don't know how many of these missiles are being transferred to the Ukrainians. Some of them have already, it's believed some of them have already been sent, and the Ukrainian Air Force are already training and modifying their aircraft to carry them, because they're bloody heavy buggers, so they are. 2,900 pounds, 1,300 kilograms, 1.3 tons. So they are a heavy munition, but it is the real game changer is that the range of 250 kilometers. So the planes could fly in a very safe area within Ukraine, launch the missile, and it could hit something in Crimea, and not have to interact, not have to have any interaction whatsoever with Russian Air Force. So this could be a game changer, certainly. And the sooner this war ends, the sooner peace can be restored, the better. But we'll have to wait and see. So, guys, I just want to say thank you to everyone who came on tonight. Thanks so much for the super chats. Greatly appreciated. Thanks to the moderators for doing a wonderful job. Remember to check out the Sunday Roast on Sunday. Usual time, same bat channel as always. We have some very interesting guests and we talk about Brexit. Yay, Brexit, because it's going so well. And before we finish, of course, we have our one for the road. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm sure you will.
Absolutely clear that I would... Look, can I make it absolutely clear that I would not recommend stabbing you in the leg? In fact, if you remember, I actually argued very strongly against that particular course of action. However, now somebody has actually done that, I think it's very important that we leave time for the knife to bed in before we can judge just how bad things are. In fact, it might turn out to be useful. Every so often, we can give it a twist. Remember, I did try to warn you that cancelling your gym membership and cutting all fresh fruit and vegetables out of your diet was a bad idea. But now that you've done that, I have to respect your decision. No, I won't be trying to persuade you to rejoin the gym or try a carrot. That would be re-litigating the past. What we have to do is focus on the future and make a great success of you in your declining physical condition. Yes, I'll admit that when I joined this team, I did promise that you'd be able to see me whenever you liked and that all of my appointments would be free of charge. But I'm afraid that things have changed since then, and so have my promises. But I'm confident that you'll still come and see me, because who else are you going to go and see? That bloke down the road who sells crystals, or your previous doctor who, let's not forget, actually stabbed you in the leg? Come on. I'm your only option, so I'll have to do.
Oh my goodness. You have to laugh because otherwise you will cry. So guys, have a great weekend. I'll see you on Sunday for the Sunday Roast. If I don't see you then, I'll see you on Tuesday, same bad time, same bad channel. Have a great weekend, and as always, stay safe. Take care. Good night.